Hi everybody, Ninja Mama here. Today I want to cover the topic of narcissistic supply. We've already discussed some of the behaviors and argument tactics of the narcissist, but it's also important, especially when you're in a situation where you cannot completely go no contact with your narcissist. Like in my situation, you have children together. You need to understand how their brain works, how they operate. You need to understand this. So you have to educate yourself as much as possible. And one of the best sources that I found is I consider him the expert on narcissism is Sam Batman, because he himself is a self-aware level 9 narcissist. He says he's been twice diagnosed, and he was also diagnosed with psychopathy. So who better to go to than King Narcissist himself? Uh, I mean, his book is over 600 pages long. Um, but he's got a lot of good information in it, and I think I spoke about his book in a previous video about how it's got a great index where you can find the topic you want to read about, and also in his website he has a lot of the book reproduced in the website, and that's what I'm reading from today. So the question, this is a section, this is from a section of the book where he has commonly asked questions and answers. And he's extremely thorough. So I'm not going to be able to read all of it, but I'll leave the link in the description box so you can take a look at the article yourself. So what is narcissistic supply? He explains that healthy narcissism is the foundation of self-esteem and underlies self-confidence. We all need and consume narcissistic supply. This is part of being human. We all search for positive cues, positive feedback, approval, affirmation, love, or even hard-earned admiration from the people around us. These cues reinforce in us certain behavioral patterns. There is nothing special in the fact that the narcissist does the same. However, there are two major differences between the narcissistic and the normal personality. The first is quantitative. The normal person is likely to welcome a moderate amount of attention, both verbal and nonverbal. Too much attention, though, is perceived as onerous and is avoided. Destructive and censorious criticism is shunned altogether. Healthy people can endure long periods without these inputs, and their absence does not affect their self-regulation and psychological health and functioning. The narcissist, in contrast, is the mental equivalent of an alcoholic. He is insatiable. He compulsively directs his whole behavior, in fact, his life, to obtaining these pleasurable tidbits of attention. He embeds them in a coherent, completely biased, fantastic picture of himself. He uses them to regulate his labile sense of self-worth and self-esteem. He needs narcissistic supply to carry out basic mental ego functions. Without it, he crumbles and becomes dysfunctional. To elicit constant interest, he projects to others a confabulated fictitious version of himself, known as the false self. The false self is everything the narcissist is not: omniscient, omnipotent, charming, intelligent, rich, or well connected. The narcissist then proceeds to harvest reactions to this projected image from family members, friends, co-workers, neighbors, etc. If if these, the adulation, admiration, attention, fear, respect, applause, affirmation, are not forthcoming, the narcissist demands them or extorts them. Money, compliments, a favorable critique, an appearance in the media, a sexual conquest are all converted into the same currency in the narcissist's mind. The currency is called narcissistic supply. It is important to distinguish between the various components of the process of narcissistic supply. So, okay, now he's going to go into the parts of obtaining it, the different parts that are involved in obtaining the supply. There is a trigger of supply. The trigger is the person or object that provokes the source into yielding narcissistic supply by confronting the source with information about the narcissist's false self. The source of narcissistic supply is the person that provides the narcissistic supply. Narcissistic supply itself is the reaction of the source to the trigger. So he uses a trigger to garner the reaction from the source. The source gives the reaction to the narcissist, and that reaction is the supply. Publicity, celebrity, or notoriety, being famous or infamous, is a trigger of narcissistic supply because it provokes people to pay attention to the narcissist. In other words, it moves sources to provide the narcissist with narcissistic supply. Publicity can be obtained by exposing oneself, by creating something, or by provoking attention. The narcissist resorts to all three repeatedly, as drug addicts do, to secure their daily dose. A mate or companion is one such source of narcissistic supply. But the picture is even more complicated than that. There's two categories of narcissistic supply and their sources. The primary narcissistic supply is the attention in both public forms and private interpersonal forms. Public forms would be like fame, notoriety, or celebrity. Interpersonal forms are direct applause, adoration, adulation, or on the negative side, even fear and repulsion are considered to be supplied to the narcissist. Because remember, they'll take positive or negative. It is important to understand that attention of any kind, here he goes, positive or negative, constitutes primary narcissistic supply. Infamy is as sought after as fame. Being notorious is as good as being renowned. To the narcissist, his achievements can be imaginary, fictitious, or only apparent, as long as others believe in them. Appearances count more than substance. What matters is not the truth, but its perception. Narcissistic supply comes in two forms: animate or direct supply, and inanimate or indirect supply. Inanimate supply is comprised of all expressions of attention which are communicated impersonally. This means in written form or via a third party, as well as aggregate measures of popularity, such as the number of friends one has on Facebook or the number of views on YouTube. Animate supply requires an interpersonal interaction with a source of narcissistic supply in the flesh. To sustain his sense of self-worth, the narcissist requires both types of supply, but especially the animate variety. He needs to witness firsthand the impact his false self has on living, breathing, flesh and blood human sources and on his immediate environment. Then he goes into some examples of what triggers are, sources and secondary, sources of primary and sources of secondary. He says triggers of primary narcissistic supply can include, of course, being famous, someone who has an air of mystique, having sex and deriving from it a sense of masculinity, virility, femininity, or being closely connected with connected people, like influential political figures or spiritual figures or authority figures. People can also, the narcissist can actually use people as a trigger to attract attention from other people. Sources of primary narcissistic supply are all those who provide the narcissist with narcissistic supply on a casual, random basis. Secondary narcissistic supply includes leading a normal life, having a secure existence, and obtaining companionship. Thus, having a mate, possessing conspicuous wealth, being creative, running a business, possessing a sense of anarchic freedom, being a member of a group or collective, having a professional or other reputation, owning property, and flaunting one's status symbol all constitutes secondary narcissistic supply as well. The sources of secondary narcissistic supply are all those who provide the narcissist with secondary narcissistic supply on a regular basis. This would include spouse, friends, colleagues, business partners, teachers, neighbors, and so on. Both these primary and secondary narcissistic supply and their triggers and sources are incorporated in a narcissistic pathological space. So basically, he has to have the secondary sources of supply in order to be able to get quality primary supply. So if he wants to be admired and envied, he's got to appear as a successful, normal guy. That's what he uses his family for. I'm going to have to pause this for a second. Sorry about that interruption, everybody. Okay, so I was saying that a lot of them will use their family as their secondary supply. And as Mr. Backman pointed out, the secondary supply is used to provide the narcissist with it, or basically to provide his false self with the appearance of being a normal, everyday guy. But the spouse is not only, I feel, is not only a secondary source, but she also serves as a primary source when, at times when there are no other primary sources available. He will expect the spouse to directly give him praise and attention and adulation. Absolutely. Let's see, there was another part of this I wanted to go over. He goes into like how this false self develops and how they turn to this defense mechanism of objectifying people to extract attention from. They basically get into a habit of using people as tools to extract attention and praise for themselves. I'm not going to do that part of the article, but the link that I'm going to put in the description box will take you to the place on his website where all of this is included. It talks about another question on this topic he answers is, why does the narcissist devalue his source of secondary narcissistic supply? Because, and you'll find that oftentimes, like, the spouse, who is often the main secondary source of supply, is the one who gets the brunt of their abuse, and we'll see a lot of the actual true self come out when the mask slips. And then when this partner or spouse leaves the relationship and tells people what they experienced, a lot of people are shocked. They and often don't believe it because they've never seen that part of the narcissist. The narcissist always had the false self when he was projecting his public image. So why do they devalue their source of secondary narcissistic supply? Well, they're forever in pursuit, he says, of supply. So they're oblivious to the passage of time and they're not constrained by any behavioral consistency, any rules of conduct, or moral considerations. Signal to the narcissist that you are a willing source and he is bound to try to extract narcissistic supply from you by any and all means. This is a reflex. The narcissist would have reacted absolutely the same way to any other source because to him all sources are interchangeable. Some sources of supply are ideal from the narcissist's point of view. They're sufficiently intelligent, sufficiently gullible, submissive, reasonably but not overly inferior to the narcissist, in possession of a good memory with which to regulate the flow of narcissistic supply, available but not imposing, not explicitly or overtly manipulative, undemanding, attractive, if the narcissist is somatic. But then, often abruptly and inexplicably, it is all over. The narcissist is cold, uninterested, and remote. One of the reasons is, as Groucho Marx put it, that the narcissist doesn't like to belong to those clubs which would accept him as a member. The narcissist devalues his sources of supply for the very qualities that made them such sources in the first place. Their gullibility, their submissiveness, their intellectual or physical inferiority. But there are many other reasons. For instance, the narcissist resents his dependency. He realizes that he is hopelessly and helplessly addicted to the supply and is in hock to its sources. By devaluing the sources of said supply, his spouse, his employer, his colleague, his friend, he ameliorates the dissonance. Moreover, the narcissist perceives intimacy and sex as a threat to his uniqueness. Everyone needs sex and intimacy. It is the great equalizer. The narcissist resents this commonness. He rebels by striking out at perceived founts of his frustration and enslavement, his sources of narcissistic supply. Sex and intimacy are usually also connected to unresolved past conflicts with important primary objects, meaning his parents or caregivers. By constantly invoking these conflicts, the narcissist encourages transference and provokes the onset of approach avoidance cycles. He blows hot and cold on his relationships. Additionally, narcissists simply get tired of their sources. They get bored. There is no mathematical formula which governs this. It depends on numerous variables. Usually the relationship lasts until the narcissist gets used to the source and its stimulating effects wear off, or until a better source of supply presents itself. Or, like in my case, the source of supply gets tired of the abusive treatment of the narcissist, because like he says it right here, they blow hot and cold. I mean, it's like one extreme to the next. Literally, 1 minute I was the best wife in the world. He told me how he bragged to all his friends about how wonderful I was, and then, like a couple of days later, or in some cases even a couple of hours later, I was dumb. I was a terrible wife. I didn't even know him. I didn't take any interest in listening to him or finding out about what was going on with him. And it was just, to sit there and listen to him say that, all I could think was like, he's describing exactly what he does to me. He ignores me. He doesn't let me finish a sentence. He acts completely bored and uninterested whenever I want to tell him something about myself or about something I'm interested in. It was just, it was hurtful, but it was, at the same time, it was comical to listen to, because he had no clue how bad he sounded, like the impact of what he was saying. But I digress. Also, Mr. Backman goes on to distinguish um, different types of supply. And a question that was asked to him is, could negative input serve as narcissistic supply? He says absolutely yes. They will take any kind of attention they can get, positive or negative. Um, if he can manipulate people or influence them positively or negatively, it qualifies as narcissistic supply. So even quarreling with people, which is a lot of what I experienced with my narcissist, quarreling and confronting them constitutes narcissistic supply. Perhaps not the conflict itself, but the narcissist's ability to influence other people, to make them feel the way he wants, to manipulate them, to make them do something or refrain from doing it, all count as forms of narcissistic supply, hence the phenomenon of serial litigators. Negative supply should be distinguished from low-grade or fake supply, collectively known as spurious narcissistic supply. So he goes on to distinguish low grade and fake supply. I'm sorry about that music in the background. My daughter's watching something on YouTube, and she has it turned up really loud. Okay. Low grade narcissistic supply comes from sources which cannot be idealized, no matter how hard the narcissist tries and to what extent he blocks out and denies reality. The type of narcissistic supply determines whether its source can be idealized or not. For instance, if he gets a compliment on his intellectual achievement that's doled out to a cerebral narcissist by an intellectually challenged person, that would never pass muster with him. It would never qualify as narcissistic supply. That's low grade narcissistic supply. They'll take it in a pinch, but it's not really what he wants. Sort of like giving an alcoholic a non-alcoholic beer. There's like a tiny bit of alcohol in it, but you'd have to drink a whole case of that stuff to catch a buzz of any kind. That's low-grade narcissistic supply. He gives as an example of fake narcissistic supply is tinged with ulterior motives and hidden agendas. Sources of fake supply complement the narcissist in order to manipulate him or some third person, or in order to accomplish a goal. Endowed with cold empathy, the narcissist picks up on these motivations and feels injured and slighted. Many narcissists test their sources of supply repeatedly. They engineer situations intended to expose the sincerity or lack thereof of the supply and the consistency and authenticity of the source's conduct. In turn, all the above should not be confused with static narcissistic supply. I told you the sky is extremely far out. Narcissistic supply is either static or dynamic. Dynamic supply upholds, enhances, buttresses, and affects the narcissist's grandiose and fantastic false self. The contents of dynamic narcissistic supply and the identity of its sources conform to the narcissist's image of himself, his destiny, the evolution of his life, and his place in the cosmos. Static supply fails to do so despite the fact that it is largely positive, reliably recurrent, and abundant. Static supply is akin to hospital rations or junk food. It maintains the narcissist for a while, but as an exclusive diet, it results in malnutrition. Deficient narcissistic supply. Static supply is repetitive, boring, because it is predictable and pedestrian. It does not propel the narcissist into new highs, nor does it reinflate him when he is down. So it seems that the narcissist prefers dynamic much more than static supply, but he'll take the static supply in a pinch. Um, I think that's all I'm going to cover right now because one more thing about narcissistic supply and sex. Um, this is interesting. Here he goes into the psychosexuality of all types of narcissists, cerebral and somatic alike, involves the objectification and interchangeability of intimate partners. Narcissists are polyamorous and autoerotic. Quite a few of them have comorbid sexual paraphilias and are meaning they're deviant. The cerebral narcissist aims to stabilize the flow of narcissistic supply by suppressing his sexual predilections and orientation, and thus by rendering himself asexual. The somatic narcissist aims to secure an uninterrupted flow of narcissistic supply by indulging his sexual preferences with multiple partners. The cerebral narcissist relies on his source of secondary narcissistic supply, normally on his spouse, to regulate his supply and so compensate for the inevitable fluctuations in both the quantity and quality of the primary supply. But few spouses would willingly participate in swinging, orgies, and group sex towards which the narcissist gravitates. The cerebral narcissist is, therefore, forced to sacrifice his sexuality to ensure the longevity of his gratifying and exclusive relationship with his source of secondary supply. His marriage gradually becomes sexless. To compensate for this glaring lack, the cerebral narcissist turns unto himself. He becomes autoerotic and fantasizes as he masturbates with varying frequency. His sex life is reduced to the consumption of pornography and role-playing in online forums. Such a dreary substitute for a full-fledged intercourse is never satisfying. A frustration mounts in both members of the couple. So do aggression and hostility. There is a sense of waste and dysphoria, but the cerebral narcissist would rather hurt his mate by withholding sex from her than to lose her, which would be the ineluctable consequence of him being true to his sexual self. The question arises, why doesn't the cerebral narcissist team up with an intimate partner who shares his inclinations and who would be happy to act on his fantasies? The answer is because such a partner cannot be relied on to be faithful, constant, and consistent. This is the cerebral narcissist's predicament. Intimate partners who are compatible with his sexual urges are useless as stable long-term sources of secondary supply. Intimate partners who can be relied on to provide secondary narcissistic supply are likely to be sexually incompatible with the cerebral narcissist's desires, urges, and sexual wishes. This stratagem is, of course, self-defeating. The cerebral narcissist partner ultimately abandons him, starved as she is for sex and intimacy and resentful of being the target of his repeated pent-up aggression. As far as the cerebral narcissist is concerned, being abandoned also serves as a kind of masochistic self-punishment. Narcissistic supply and sexuality are inversely related in the cerebral narcissist's mind. When narcissistic supply, primary or secondary, are low, he resorts to rampant sex as he hunts for his next stable source of secondary supply, and as he seeks to make up for lost time. When the flow of supply has been reconstituted, he reverts almost immediately to his sexual hibernation. To the cerebral narcissist, the sex act constitutes low-grade narcissistic supply, a mere stopgap measure, and a necessary evil in the capture and captivation of his future intimate partner. So this makes total sense, because if their spiel, if their whole thing is they want to be admired for their intellect, I can see exactly. Sex is going to be low-grade supply because that doesn't involve the intellect at all. So, and wow, the part where he goes on to talk about the somatic narcissist sexual is very short. And yeah, that's what my husband loves. He's more somatic. He does have some cerebral behaviors, but he was mainly somatic. So this is what I dealt with. The somatic narcissist is the mirror image of his cerebral brother. To him, sex, sexual prowess, carnal exploits, and a string of conquests is his narcissistic supply. His sexuality, however, nonconformist or even deviant, is the only stable fount of the narcissistic supply he needs to regulate his sense of self-worth. He actually seeks out and selects partners who are labile, volatile, erratic, fleeting, adventurous, and unstable as he switches between multiple sexual objects of infatuation. The somatic flaunts his sexuality and thus knowingly gives up on a stable, long-lasting relationship. So basically what happened with me was I was his secondary supply, and it was largely about sex. I mean, it was largely about appearances, about keeping up appearances and giving him the appearance of being a normal family guy, and that got him approval from family and friends and business associates and such, because you don't want to get the reputation of being like some maniac serial womanizer, playboy. He wants to be respected. He mainly wants positive attention. Of course, he will take negative attention, but he mainly wants positive attention. So and the best way to get that is to be a normal guy. That's what I provided for him. And he did. Oh, he would go around bragging about how he never cheated on me. And, of course, we all know that narcissists are pathological liars. So I'm pretty sure that if I would have been the secondary source of narcissistic supply, what he considered a primary source would have been picking up other women and getting attention from other women. And like he says, like the somatic narcissist actually seeks out partners who are labile, volatile, erratic, fleeting, adventurous, and unstable, and he will switch between multiple sexual objects of infatuation. So, there you have it, folks. Narcissistic Supply. Check out the link that I'm going to put in the description box, because he does answer some other questions, and he goes into the whole the causality of how they begin this process in childhood of they don't build themselves from the inside out. They build themselves backwards. And Patricia Evans talks about this in her books. They build themselves from the outside in. They build themselves according to how other people react to them, instead of being inner driven and gravitating, figuring out who they are and figuring out what they like to do and what they're good at. They strictly form their self, which is a false self, strictly based on what reactions they get from people. So in my case, my narcissist false self was the fun guy. He's charming. He's a nice guy. He's funny. He makes people laugh. He's a partier. He loves to party and have a good time. And that false self had different degrees of regulation, like in front of family and family. It was more, he's a goofy, silly, funny guy. But in front of the friends, it was taken a step further. He was adventurous. He would try any drug. He was up for it. If somebody, knew where to get coke, he was up for it. He was up for anything, like whatever. And in the end, that's ultimately what destroyed him. He just took it too far. So there you have it, folks. Narcissistic Supply. Thanks for listening.